I'm Paige, 32 female. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood that always felt like it was built for families, a place where the biggest drama was usually whose dog was digging up the petunias. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, and for the last 5 years, my life has revolved around my husband, Michael. To everyone who knew us, we were the picture of stability, the couple who had it all figured out. But behind the closed doors of our pristine home, a storm was brewing, and it was about to break in the most public and humiliating way possible. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Our love story, or what I thought was a love story, began like something out of a movie. We met through mutual friends at a charity gala. Michael was a sales director for a major tech firm, and he radiated a kind of effortless confidence that was impossible to ignore. He was charming, intelligent, and made me feel like I was the only person in the room. He pursued me with a gentle determination, sending flowers to my office, planning thoughtful dates, and remembering small details I'd mentioned in passing. I fell for him, hard and fast. Within a year, we were engaged, and a year after that, we were married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family. The first 2 years of our marriage were, for the most part, blissful. We built a home together, not just the physical structure, but the routines and private jokes that make a house a home. I supported his demanding career, and he celebrated my freelance successes. We were a team. Cracks, when they started to appear, were so small I could easily dismiss them. It began with subtle comments about my work. "Are you sure that client is paying you what you're worth, honey? It seems like a lot of work for a small return." At first, I took it as concern, a husband looking out for his wife. But then the comments shifted to my friends. "Scarlett seems a bit needy, doesn't she? She calls you a lot." Scarlett had been my best friend since college, my rock through every triumph and crisis. I defended her, explaining that we were just close, but Michael would just smile that disarming smile and say, "Of course, I just worry about you being taken for granted." He had a way of framing his criticism as concern, his control as care. It was insidious, a slow-acting poison I didn't recognize. The comments then turned to my appearance. "That dress is nice, but maybe a little too bright for this event." Or, "Are you sure you want to cut your hair? I love it long." Each comment was a tiny chip at my confidence, a small thread pulled from the tapestry of my self-worth. I started second-guessing my choices. From the clients I took on to the clothes I wore, all to maintain the peace and earn his approval. The perfect facade was most important when it came to his mother, Josephine. Josephine was a retired librarian, a woman of quiet dignity and sharp intellect. In the beginning, she was warm and welcoming, but as my marriage to Michael progressed, I noticed a subtle distance from her. Our conversations felt stilted, as if she were observing me from behind a pane of glass. I tried desperately to win her over, hosting elaborate Sunday dinners, remembering her birthday with thoughtful gifts, and asking for her advice on everything from gardening to literature. Michael encouraged this, often saying, "It's important that Mom sees we're a strong team." Looking back, I realize he wasn't encouraging a relationship, he was directing a performance. He wanted her to see the perfect wife, the perfect home, the perfect son. Our life was a stage play, and I was the lead actress who hadn't realized her co-star was also the manipulative director. Michael was a different person around Josephine. He was doting, attentive, and endlessly respectful towards me, hanging on my every word and pulling my chair out for me at the dinner table. If I tried to bring up any of our minor disagreements later, he would accuse me of being ungrateful. "I treat you like a queen in front of my mother, and this is how you thank me." By picking fights, the gaslighting was so effective that I started to believe him. I thought I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, too demanding. The financial control started just as subtly. Michael handled all our major finances, which made sense given his profession as a financial advisor's son who became a sales director. "Let me take care of this, Paige," he'd say. "You focus on your art. I've got the boring stuff." I was grateful at first. It felt like he was lifting a burden. I had my own business account for my freelance work, but he encouraged me to transfer most of my earnings into our joint savings account, which he managed. "It's for our future, for a bigger house, for kids," he explained. And it sounded so logical, so responsible. I didn't realize he was slowly cutting off my financial independence, making me reliant on the allowance he would transfer to my personal account each month. When I once questioned a large withdrawal from our joint account, he became defensive. "It was an investment, Paige. Do you not trust my judgment? After everything I do for us." The conversation ended with me apologizing, feeling ashamed for doubting him. He had a masterful way of turning every question into an attack on his character, and every concern I had into a flaw in my own. I was walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring my own words and actions to avoid upsetting the delicate balance of our perfect life. My world had become very small, centered entirely around Michael's moods and expectations. Scarlett noticed the change. "You seem a little distant lately," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "Is everything okay with you and Michael?" I plastered on a bright smile and assured her everything was wonderful. I was too embarrassed to admit the truth, even to my best friend. I didn't want to give voice to the nagging feeling that something was deeply wrong, because saying it out loud would make it real. And I wasn't ready to face that reality. I was still clinging to the man I fell in love with, convincing myself that he was still in there somewhere, buried beneath this new layer of control and criticism. The perfect facade was everything, but it was cracking under the strain, and I was about to find out just how fragile it truly was. The day it all shattered was a Sunday. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the sunlight streaming through our large dining room windows seemed to mock the cold tension brewing inside. Michael's mother, Josephine, was coming over for our monthly brunch, an event Michael always insisted on. He called it maintaining family ties, but I knew it was another performance, another opportunity to showcase his perfect life. That morning, the tension was thicker than usual. Michael had lost a significant client at work on Friday, and the fallout had been echoing through our house all weekend. He had been short-tempered, pacing the halls and speaking to me in clipped, dismissive tones. I did my best to stay out of his way, focusing on preparing an elaborate brunch of quiche, fresh fruit salad, and homemade scones, Josephine's favorites. I hoped a pleasant meal would soothe his temper. I was wrong. The doorbell rang precisely at 11 o'clock. Josephine was punctual, a trait she shared with her son. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and forced a welcoming smile as I opened the door. "Josephine, it's so wonderful to see you," I said, giving her a brief hug. She returned it with her usual reserved warmth, her eyes, sharp and perceptive, scanning my face for a moment too long. "It's lovely to see you too, Paige. Everything smells wonderful." As she stepped inside, Michael emerged from his study, his own smile perfectly in place. The transformation was instantaneous. The dark, brooding man from 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by the charming, attentive son and husband. "Mom, you made it," he boomed, kissing her on the cheek. "Paige has been cooking up a storm for you." He wrapped an arm around my waist, a proprietary gesture that was meant to look affectionate but felt like a vice. We made our way to the dining room, where the table was set with our best china. The conversation started smoothly enough. Josephine asked about my latest design project, and I spoke about it with genuine enthusiasm. Michael, however, kept interjecting, subtly downplaying my achievements. "It's a small local client, Mom. Paige likes to keep busy with her little hobbies," he said with a chuckle. I felt a familiar sting of humiliation, but kept my smile fixed, not wanting to cause a scene. I saw Josephine's gaze flicker between us, her expression unreadable. The topic shifted to Michael's work, and the mood immediately darkened. Josephine, in her gentle way, asked how things were going. "Everything's fine, Mom, just the usual market fluctuations," Michael said, his voice a little too tight. "I heard from Robert, your old colleague, that your firm lost the Henderson account," Josephine said calmly, taking a sip of her tea. "He mentioned it was quite a blow." The air crackled. Michael's knuckles were white as he gripped his fork. He had told me he'd handled the situation, that everything was under control. He had explicitly told me not to mention it. "Robert is a gossip," Michael snapped, his voice dangerously low. "And he doesn't know what he's talking about." "He seemed genuinely concerned, dear," Josephine said, her tone even. "There's nothing to be concerned about," Michael bit out, pushing his chair back slightly. The perfect host persona was crumbling, revealing the raw anger beneath. I tried to de-escalate, to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "Why don't W.E. have some dessert? I made your favorite scones, Josephine, with clotted cream and jam," I offered, my voice unnaturally bright. I started to stand up, hoping to create a distraction. And that's when it happened. Michael turned his fury on me. "Sit down, Paige," he commanded. "Can't you see I'm having a conversation with my mother?" His tone was so harsh, so full of contempt that it felt like a slap in itself. I froze, halfway out of my chair. "Michael, there's no need to speak to her that way," Josephine said, her voice firm, a librarian's quiet authority cutting through the tension. Michael ignored her. His eyes were locked on me, blazing with a rage that was completely disproportionate to the situation. "You always do this," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that was loud enough for his mother to hear. "You always try to manage things, to smooth everything over. You think I can't handle my own mother?" I was speechless, my heart pounding against my ribs. I slowly sank back into my chair, my appetite gone, my throat tight with unshed tears. I just wanted the ground to swallow me whole. The silence stretched for a few unbearable seconds. Then I found a sliver of my voice. "I was just trying to help," I whispered, looking down at my plate. His reaction was instantaneous. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Before I could even process his movement, he leaned across the corner of the table, and his hand connected with my cheek. The slap was loud, a shocking crack in the quiet room. My head snapped to the side, and a burning, stinging pain exploded across my face. For a moment, the world went silent. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The shock was so profound, so absolute that I couldn't even cry. I just sat there, my hand slowly coming up to touch my throbbing cheek, my eyes wide with disbelief. It had happened. The thing I had secretly feared, the culmination of all the small cruelties and controlling behaviors, had finally happened. And it had happened in front of his mother. In the deafening silence that followed the slap, time seemed to warp. The scent of scones and coffee hung in the air, a grotesque contrast to the violence that had just occurred. My cheek burned, a physical manifestation of the shame and shock that were coursing through me. I kept my head turned, unable to look at either of them, my gaze fixed on a sunbeam dancing on the opposite wall. I fully expected Josephine to rush to her son's defense. I braced myself for the excuses I was sure would come. "He's just under a lot of stress," or "You shouldn't have provoked him," or the soul-crushing, "This is a private family matter." I had seen it in movies, read it in books, the matriarch protecting her son at all costs, closing ranks against the outsider, the wife. Michael seemed to expect the same thing. He stood there, breathing heavily, his chest puffed out like a victorious predator. He looked from my stunned face to his mother, a flicker of defiance in his eyes, as if daring her to challenge him. But the words I was expecting never came. Instead, what broke the silence was the soft, deliberate sound of a teacup being placed back on its saucer. It was a small, precise sound, yet it echoed in the room with the finality of a gavel. I slowly, hesitantly, turned my head. Josephine was looking not at me, but directly at her son. Her face, usually so composed and serene, was a mask of cold fury. The quiet, reserved librarian was gone, and in her place was a woman I had never seen before. Her eyes, which I had always thought of as gentle, were now like chips of ice. "Michael," she said, and her voice was terrifyingly calm. It held no hysteria, no shock, just a chilling, absolute certainty. "What did you just do?" Michael faltered. The arrogance seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He clearly hadn't anticipated this reaction. "Mom, she was undermining me," he began, his voice taking on a whiny, self-pitying tone. "She always does this, I am not talking to you about her." Josephine cut him off, her voice slicing through his excuses. "I asked you what you just did." She stood up, her movements graceful but filled with a powerful, coiled tension. She didn't come towards me. Instead, she walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of her son, forcing him to look at her. He was a head taller than her, a physically imposing man, but in that moment, he seemed to shrink under her gaze. "You put your hand on your wife," she stated, not as a question, but as an indictment. In my presence, in this house that she has made a home. It was a mistake, Michael stammered, finally looking flustered. I'm under a lot of pressure, I didn't mean. There is no excuse, Josephine said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, which was somehow more menacing than a shout. There is no amount of pressure in this world that gives a man the right to strike a woman. I did not raise you to be a coward. The word coward hung in the air between them. Michael visibly flinched as if she had slapped him herself. He opened his mouth to argue, but she held up a hand, silencing him instantly. Then she did something I never would have predicted in a million years. She turned away from him, walked calmly to the hall table where her purse lay, and took out her cell phone. My heart hammered in my chest. What was she doing? Michael watched her, a look of dawning horror on his face. Mom, what are you doing? Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. Mom? His voice was escalating, laced with panic. Josephine ignored him. With steady fingers, she dialed 3 numbers. I could see them from across the room. 911, my breath hitched. Michael lunged towards her, trying to grab the phone, but she sidestepped him with a surprising agility. Don't you dare touch me, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that stopped him dead in his tracks. She put the phone to her ear. Yes, hello, she said, her voice perfectly composed. I'd like to report a domestic assault. My name is Josephine Miller. I am at 125 Cherry Blossom Lane. My son has just assaulted his wife. She paused, listening. Yes, he's still here. He is agitated, but I do not believe he is armed. The victim is his wife, Paige Miller. Yes, we will wait outside. She ended the call and placed the phone back in her purse. The entire exchange had taken less than a minute. The room was silent once more, but this was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a world irrevocably changed. Michael stared at his mother, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. You called the cops? He whispered, his voice cracking. On your own son? Josephine looked at him, and for the first time I saw a flicker of deep, profound sadness in her eyes, the grief of a mother seeing the monster her child had become. I called the police on a man who hit a woman, she corrected him. The fact that he is my son is a source of shame, not a reason for exemption. She then turned to me, and her gaze softened. Paige, she said gently, let's go wait on the porch. I was still frozen in my chair, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. She walked over to me, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently rested it on my shoulder. Her touch was firm and steady, grounding me in the surreal moment. Come on, dear, she urged. It's time. Numbly, I stood up. I didn't look at Michael. I couldn't. I let his mother guide me out of the dining room, past the wreckage of our brunch, and out the front door into the bright, cool autumn air. As the door clicked shut behind us, I heard a crash from inside, the sound of something breaking. But I didn't flinch. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Standing on the porch next to this woman who I had so desperately tried to impress, this woman who had just become my most unexpected and powerful ally, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The wail of a distant siren was growing closer, and I knew it was the sound of my old life coming to an end. The arrival of the police was a blur of flashing lights and calm, professional voices. 2 officers, a man and a woman, separated us immediately. The female officer, a kind-faced woman named Officer Davies, led me to the side of the porch, speaking in a gentle, reassuring tone. She asked me what happened, and for the first time, the dam broke. The tears I had been holding back streamed down my face as I recounted the morning's events, my voice trembling as I described the slap. She carefully documented the red mark on my cheek, taking photos with a small camera. Across the lawn, the male officer was speaking with Michael, who was trying and failing to project an air of calm reason. From where I stood, I could hear fragments of his defense. A misunderstanding, a family argument. She's being overly dramatic. Josephine stood apart from both scenes, a silent, statuesque witness. When Officer Davies asked if I wanted to press charges, I hesitated for only a second. I looked over at Josephine, who met my gaze and gave me a firm, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the encouragement I needed. Yes, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. Yes, I do. Michael was arrested and taken away in the back of the patrol car. The sight of him being handcuffed, his face a mixture of rage and humiliation, didn't bring me any joy. It just felt surreal. Like the final, inevitable scene of a tragedy. After the police left, Josephine turned to me. "You can't stay here tonight, Paige," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Pack a bag, you're coming home with me." I was too emotionally exhausted to protest. Numbly, I went inside, the house feeling vast and unnervingly silent. I packed a small suitcase with clothes and toiletries, my movements robotic. As I was leaving my bedroom, my eyes fell on Michael's home office. An idea, sharp and clear, cut through the fog of my shock. The police had taken his phone and personal laptop as part of their procedure, but his work computer was still on his desk. I remembered him complaining about its outdated security, something his company's IT department was slow to fix. He often stayed logged in for convenience. An impulse I didn't fully understand compelled me to walk into the room. I sat down in his expensive leather chair and moved the mouse. The screen lit up. He was logged in. What was I even looking for? I wasn't sure. I just had a profound, gut-wrenching feeling that the slap was not an isolated incident, but the tip of a very large, very dark iceberg. I started with his emails. I scanned through client correspondence, internal memos, and then I found a folder simply labeled personal. My heart began to pound. With a shaking hand, I clicked on it. It was a treasure trove of his deceit. There were emails to a divorce lawyer, dated from 6 months ago. He had been planning to leave me. The consultation summary was clinical and cruel. He was seeking advice on how to secure the majority of our assets, including my freelance business earnings, which, as he had so cleverly arranged, were funneled into our joint accounts. He had painted a picture of me as being emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible, a narrative he was clearly building to use against me in court. The betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. But that was just the beginning. I found another subfolder labeled investments. It wasn't stocks and bonds. It was a detailed record of financial transfers, large sums of money moved from our joint savings into a private account under his name only. He had been systematically draining our shared future for over a year, tens of thousands of dollars siphoned away into an account I never knew existed. The dates of the transfers often corresponded with times he had been particularly critical or controlling, as if he were punishing me while simultaneously robbing me blind. Then I found the photos. A folder hidden within another, innocuously labeled Q3 projections. It was filled with pictures of him with another woman. They were on vacation, laughing on a beach, kissing under a sunset. He looked happy, relaxed, a version of himself I hadn't seen in years. I didn't recognize her. The timestamp on the photos was from 3 months ago, during a week he had told me he was at a mandatory corporate retreat in another state. The lies were so audacious, so complete, that I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just an affair, it was a completely separate life he had been living. I knew I needed evidence. I grabbed a USB drive from a desk drawer and began frantically downloading everything: the emails with the lawyer, the bank statements from the secret account, the photos. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. Every file I copied felt like a small piece of justice, a weapon I was gathering for a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. When I had everything, I logged out of the computer, my mind racing. I walked out of the office and found Josephine waiting patiently in the living room. She must have seen the look on my face because her expression immediately shifted from concern to alarm. "Paige, what is it? What did you find?" I couldn't speak. I just held up the small USB drive in my trembling hand. I didn't have to explain. She understood. Her face hardened, the sadness I'd seen earlier replaced by a steely resolve. "Good," she said, her voice firm. "Knowledge is power. Now let's go." As we drove to her small, quiet house filled with books and memories, the full weight of Michael's betrayal settled upon me. He hadn't just hit me. He had been actively working to dismantle my life, my finances, and my sanity for years, all while playing the part of a loving husband. He had isolated me, controlled me, and gaslighted me into believing I was the problem. The man I married didn't exist. He was a fiction, a carefully constructed character designed to get what he wanted. In his place was a stranger, a cruel and calculating thief who had stolen not just my money, but my trust, my confidence, and 5 years of my life. Sitting in the passenger seat of Josephine's car, clutching the USB drive in my hand, I felt a new emotion beginning to burn through the shock and grief. Rage. A cold, clear, and focused rage. He had wanted to bring my world crashing down. He had no idea I was a boo. To do the same to his. The next few days were spent in the quiet sanctuary of Josephine's home. It was a place of order and peace, a stark contrast to the chaos that had been my life. Books lined every wall, and the air smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. In this calm environment, my initial shock and rage began to cool and solidify into something far more potent, a plan. Josephine was my silent partner in this. She didn't pry or offer unsolicited advice. Instead, she provided a steady, grounding presence. She made me tea, ensured I was eating, and sat with me in comfortable silence as I processed the mountain of evidence I had uncovered. She had a librarian's gift for research and organization. Together, we went through the contents of the USB drive, printing out every email, every bank statement, every incriminating photograph. We laid them out on her large oak dining table, creating a timeline of Michael's deceit. It was a painful but necessary process, each piece of paper another brick in the wall of his lies. My first call was to Scarlett. I had been avoiding her, ashamed of the secret I had been keeping. But now, telling her everything felt like a release. "Paige, I've been so worried," she said, her voice filled with concern. I took a deep breath and told her everything: the slap, Josephine's call to the police, the secret bank accounts, the affair. I expected her to be furious with me for not telling her sooner, but there was only warmth and unwavering support in her voice. "Oh, honey. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm not surprised. I always felt there was something off about him, the way he tried to keep you to himself." Her validation was like a balm on a raw wound. "I'm coming over," she declared, and less than an hour later, she was at Josephine's door with a bag full of comfort food and a fierce, protective look in her eyes. Scarlett was practical and clear-headed. While Josephine provided the emotional anchor, Scarlett became my strategic advisor. "You need a lawyer," she said, after looking over the evidence. "Not just any lawyer, you need a shark." She spent the rest of the afternoon on her laptop, vetting the top divorce and financial fraud attorneys in the city. By evening, we had a name: Anita Sharma, a woman with a reputation for being brilliant, relentless, and specializing in cases involving hidden assets. The next morning, I called Anita Sharma's office. Her assistant told me she was booked for weeks, but I insisted. "Please," I said, my voice steady, "just tell her I have documented proof of financial fraud, asset concealment in a divorce proceeding, and a pending domestic assault charge against my husband." There was a pause, and then the assistant said, "Can you hold, please?" 2 minutes later, Anita Sharma herself was on the line. "You have my attention, Ms. Miller. Can you be in my office at 2 p.m.?" My meeting with Anita was transformative. She was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her late 40s with eyes that missed nothing. I laid out the story, and Josephine and I presented the organized files of evidence. Anita listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Miller has made several critical errors," she said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "First, he put his hands on you in front of a credible witness, his own mother. That assault charge gives us tremendous leverage. Second, he put his entire plan in writing. Emails to his lawyer before filing for divorce show clear intent to defraud. And third, he underestimated you." She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the stack of bank statements. "This isn't just a divorce case anymore, Paige. This is a potential criminal case for fraud. We are not just going to divorce him. We are going to dismantle his entire financial house of cards." Our strategy was silent and swift. On Anita's advice, I filed for an emergency protective order, which was granted immediately given the arrest. Michael was legally barred from contacting me or coming near either Josephine's house or our shared home. Next, Anita's team filed for divorce and simultaneously filed a motion to freeze all our assets, including the secret bank account I had discovered. This would prevent Michael from moving or hiding any more money. The motion included copies of the bank statements from the USB drive, a shocking opening salvo he would not see coming. The most crucial part of our plan involved his career. Michael worked for a publicly traded tech company with a strict code of conduct. His position as a sales director relied heavily on a reputation of trustworthiness and integrity. Anita explained that while the divorce was a civil matter, financial fraud was not. She drafted a carefully worded letter to the chief compliance officer and the head of HR at Michael's company. The letter didn't make accusations. It simply stated facts. It informed them that Michael Miller was under investigation for significant financial misconduct, including the misappropriation of marital assets into an undisclosed account, and that this information would become a matter of public record during the divorce proceedings. We attached a single, anonymized statement showing a large transfer from our joint account to a secret one. We weren't asking them to fire him. We were merely informing them of a massive liability risk associated with one of their senior employees. Companies like this hate two things: legal liability and bad press, Anita explained. They will conduct their own internal investigation, and they will be ruthless. As I signed the papers and authorized Anita to send the letter, I felt a sense of calm determination. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my security, and my power. Michael had operated in the shadows, counting on my silence and fear. He thought he was playing a game where he was the only one who knew the rules. But now, the board was set, the pieces were in motion, and he was about to find out what it felt like to be checked from every possible angle. The silent strategy was in place. All we had to do now was wait for the screams. The first sign that our strategy was working came 3 days after Anita sent the letter to Michael's employer. I received a frantic, rambling voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was Michael, clearly violating the protective order. His voice was a cocktail of panic and rage. "Paige, what have you done?" he yelled into the phone. "You've ruined me. My company put me on administrative leave. They're investigating my accounts. This is all your fault, you and my mother. You're going to pay for this?" The message was a gift. I saved it and immediately forwarded it to Anita, who filed a motion for contempt of court due to the violation of the protective order. Michael was digging his own grave, and he didn't even have the sense to stop. A week later, the main event began. We were seated in a sterile conference room for the deposition. It was the first time I had seen Michael since the day of his arrest. He looked terrible. His usually impeccable suit was slightly rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He sat next to his lawyer, a smug-looking man who clearly underestimated the storm that was about to hit. Michael refused to look at me, but he shot a look of pure venom at his mother, who sat beside me, calm and composed as ever. Anita began the deposition with a calm, almost surgical precision. She started with the day of the brunch. "Mr. Miller, could you please describe the events of Sunday, September 28th? Michael, coached by his lawyer, gave a sanitized version of the story. "We had a disagreement. It was a stressful time. I regret my actions." "When you say you regret your actions, are you referring to the act of striking your wife across the face?" Anita asked, her voice dangerously soft. Michael's lawyer objected. "Asked and answered. He said he regrets it." "I'm just seeking clarity," Anita said smoothly, turning a page in her notes. "Because your mother, who was also present, characterized it differently in her police statement. She called it an unprovoked assault." "Is your mother a liar, Mr. Miller?" Michael sputtered, caught off guard. "No, of course not, but she was upset. Yes, I imagine she was," Anita cut in. Seeing her son commit a crime would be quite upsetting. She moved on, circling him like a shark. She brought up the emails to his divorce lawyer, 6 months prior to the incident. "Mr. Miller, in this email to your attorney, you outline a strategy to portray your wife as emotionally unstable in order to gain a favorable asset division. Were you planning to divorce your wife at this time?" His lawyer tried to claim attorney-client privilege, but Anita was PR. "Epard, the privilege does not extend to communications made in furtherance of a crime or fraud, counsel, and conspiring to hide marital assets is fraud." The room went cold. Michael's lawyer began to look nervous. Then Anita brought out the bank statements from the secret account. She laid them on the table, a neat stack of damning evidence. "Mr. Miller, can you identify account number 4587XXXX? Is this your account?" Michael paled, staring at the papers as if they were snakes. I don't recall." You don't recall an account into which you have deposited over $85,000 in the last 12 months. An account that is not listed on any of your joint financial disclosures. Anita's voice was like ice. Perhaps these statements will refresh your memory. She pushed the stack towards him. He wouldn't touch them. His lawyer leaned over, his eyes widening as he read the first page. He whispered something urgently to Michael, who just shook his head, looking trapped. The final blow came in the form of the photographs. Anita slid a single, glossy 8x10 photo across the table. It was a picture of Michael and the other woman, kissing on a balcony with a sunset behind them. "Can you identify the woman in this photograph, Mr. Miller?" Michael stared at the photo, his jaw clenched. "That's a friend." "A friend?" Anita raised an eyebrow. "Is it customary for you to go on week-long vacations to the Caribbean and kiss your friends in this manner? Because your wife, Paige, was under the impression you were at a corporate retreat in Chicago that week." At that moment, something inside Michael finally snapped. He shoved the table, sending papers flying. "This is a setup," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me and then at his mother. "You two conspired against me. She was always a gold digger, and you," he spat at Josephine, "you chose her over your own son." His lawyer was frantically trying to restrain him, but the damage was done. His outburst was a full confession of his guilt and paranoia. His lawyer, looking utterly defeated, immediately called for a recess. He pulled Anita aside into the hallway. Through the glass, I could see him speaking urgently, his hands gesturing wildly. Michael sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. Josephine simply watched him, her expression not of triumph, but of profound pity. 20 minutes later, Anita and the lawyer returned. "Mr. Miller's counsel has proposed a settlement," Anita announced, her face neutral. "They are willing to concede on all points. Paige will receive 70% of all marital assets, including the full balance of the hidden account, which will be liquidated and transferred to her immediately. She will also receive the house, free and clear. Michael will assume all marital debt and be solely responsible for his own legal fees. In exchange, we agree not to pursue separate criminal charges for financial fraud, though we will, of course, continue to cooperate fully with the district attorney on the assault charge." It was more than I could have ever hoped for. It was total capitulation. I looked at Michael. He was a broken man, stripped of his arrogance and his carefully constructed empire. He had lost his wife, his mother's respect, his job, and now his money. The reckoning was complete. I turned to Anita. "I accept," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. Walking out of that conference room felt like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into the sunlight. The weight that I had been carrying for years, the constant anxiety and self-doubt, had finally been lifted. The legal battle was over, but the process of rebuilding my life was just beginning. The divorce was finalized quickly. True to the settlement, the house was signed over to me, and a significant sum of money was deposited into a new bank account that was mine and mine alone. The first thing I did was change the locks. The simple act of turning a new key in the door of my own home was incredibly symbolic. This was my space now, a place where I would be safe, a place where no one would ever make me feel small again. Michael's reign was over. The aftermath for him was swift and brutal. His company, having conducted its own internal investigation, fired him for gross misconduct and violation of their ethics code. The assault charge went to court, and with Josephine's unwavering testimony, he was found guilty. He avoided jail time but was sentenced to 2 years of probation, a mandatory anger management program, and a hefty fine. The public record of his conviction made it nearly impossible for him to find another high-level position in his field. I heard through the grapevine that he had to sell his luxury car and move into a small apartment across town. His carefully curated life of success and power had crumbled into dust. I felt no satisfaction in his ruin, only a quiet sense of justice. His downfall was not my creation, it was the consequence of his own actions. My own life began to blossom. With the financial security from the settlement, I was able to invest in my graphic design business. I rented a small studio space downtown, separating my work from my home for the first time. The business thrived. Free from Michael's constant criticism, my creativity flourished. I took on bigger, more exciting projects, and my confidence grew with every successful design. I reconnected with friends whom Michael had subtly pushed away, including my best friend, Scarlett. Our friendship picked up right where it left off, filled with laughter and unwavering support. We took a trip together, a spontaneous vacation to the coast, and as I stood on the beach with the wind in my hair, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. But the most profound change was in my relationship with Josephine. The woman I once saw as a distant, judgmental mother-in-law had become one of the most important people in my life. She was no longer just Michael's mother. She was Josephine, my friend, my mentor, my staunchest ally. We established a new routine of having dinner together every Thursday. We talked about everything: books, politics, gardening, and our shared experience. She never spoke of Michael with anger, only a deep, abiding sadness for the son she had lost long before he was ever arrested. "I didn't do it for you, Paige," she told me one evening, looking at me over her teacup. "I did it for the little boy I raised who believed in right and wrong. I did it because I had to. But I am so incredibly glad that in doing what was right, I was able to help you find your strength." I came to understand that her initial distance wasn't disapproval of me, it was suspicion of her own son. She had seen the subtle signs of his controlling nature long before I had, but she had felt powerless to intervene, trapped by the complex bonds of family. The slap was simply the one line she could not, and would not, allow him to cross. One sunny afternoon, about a year after the divorce, I was working in my garden when a car pulled up. It was Josephine. She got out holding a small, potted lemon tree. "Every new beginning needs something that will grow," she said, handing it to me with a smile. We planted it together in a sunny spot in the backyard. As we patted the soil around its base, I looked around at my life, my beautiful home, my thriving business, my cherished friendships. I had once thought my life was a perfect picture created by my husband, but I had been wrong. The life I was living now, the one I had built myself from the ashes of betrayal, was the true masterpiece. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, it was strong, and it was mine. The scars were still there, faint reminders of the pain I had endured, but they no longer defined me. They were just part of the story, a testament to the fact that I had survived, I had fought back, and I had won. And as I looked at the little lemon tree, a symbol of a future filled with possibility, I knew, with absolute certainty, that the sourest moments in life can sometimes lead to the sweetest new beginnings.